Dato Osman available on the, I just want to make sure that he can show up on the screen. And we can hear him, right? If Prof, if you'd like to speak, just so we can. He should be, yeah. Yeah, just so everyone knows, this is sort of a strange event. It's going to be a hybrid event. Some of us will be tuning in from Zoom. Thank you to all who are in the room, and for those of you all in the world for tuning in and joining us for this event. So if you'd like, we're going to have some questions, so please write down any questions that come up over the course of this conversation. As well, you can post any questions you'd like in the Zoom chat. We'll try to get to those toward the end. So to begin, I just want to give a brief introduction to the two books, because it might seem weird to you. Why are us, myself, joined by these three luminaries just talking about these two books at this particular time? So the first book is a book that's actually co-published. So I'm the assistant director of the Center for Postmodern Policy and Future Studies, CPPFS. And we work closely with IIIT, and so the International Institute of Islamic Thought, to publish the book Epistemologies, which is edited by Prof. Ziauddin Sardar, who's sitting here beside me. A piece by himself, and afterwards written by Dato, Seri, who's also joining us as well. At the same time, we have put out the latest issue of Critical Muslim, which is a quarterly journal via and myself. Times a year we come out with new issues, with contributions from various writers from all over the world that's centered out of London through the Muslim Institute in London, which he is a part of. And so this issue happens to be on the theme of ignorance. So with each issue, there's a different take on the theme and their own ideas or angle on how to discuss it. And since stuff happens to be, and we have both of these books about epistemology from the country of epistemology, which is really knowledge creation, what goes into that, what are the biases, worldviews, things you can get into, and this is packed with a lot of ideas about emerging epistemologies facing us in the present and what's going on into the future. Ignorance is that while there's knowledge creation, there can also be ignorant creation. And why do we ever talk about ignorance, right? We talk about knowledge, but why are we talking about one side of the story? What about the other side? What about our ignorances? And so that's kind of conversation. So I would like to now turn to the speaker because I've spoken for way too long. I broke my own rule. We're going to go on more of a journey. This will be a little different. This isn't going to be your typical, everyone stands up and goes to the next lecture and we all clap and well done. I want to know your story. So we're going to go somewhat back in time. We're all enjoying them on this journey going back in time. They don't just arise out of anywhere, right? They don't come out of nothingness. They have to have a history. And so we're going to go back and tease at this history and see if maybe in this story we can figure out the real heart of the problem, this epistemological crisis, or this crisis of ignorance that we may be facing, and see what we can do to it. So we're going to go back to before Prof. Dato Osman Bakar was a prof, or a Dato, or anything other than Brother Osman. Likewise, we're going to go back to before Dato Seri was Dato Seri, before he was the Deputy Prime Minister, before the Minister of Education, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Sports. Did I miss any? Before all of that, when he was just Brother Anwar. And we'll go back to before Professor Ziauddin Sardar was Prof. He was just young Zia. So, to set the stage, I want to ask the three of you, we'll perhaps begin with you, Dato Seri. What was happening in the 1970s? You at that time were a rising youth leader in university, rising through ABIM, the Malaysian Muslim Youth Organization here. What were the conversations you were having? What was the atmosphere at the time overall in the world? What were the hopes? What were the topics of discussion?
Sort of thing. What Jahiliyah stands for. This was long before we were exposed to epistemology, right? Then we realized, and it's interesting, I mean, of course, Mr. Kamal is here. I feel very embarrassed to have to say these things in front of him. And the first real serious academic treatise on the issue of epistemology, on what is Jahiliyah, dimension. It is not just lacking knowledge, but true knowledge. What Hawking recently said about illusion of knowledge. You think you master the subject, but in actual fact, you do not understand, although he takes it from extremely secular understanding. But it has relevance. That's why the traditional scholars, this was highlighted, I think, is this great this Indian scholar who taught the three characteristics of the Indian society. I mean, I use that he talks about, of course, but he talks about power, politics. He talks about the realm of scholarship, knowledge, and also those who are bestowed by great wealth. And all this has clear evidence of what a Jahiliyah society is all about. When you have power, you just enhance your power, and there's no ethical basis of consideration. Corruption and facade is tolerated, and the hypocrisy, the contradictions you see among scholars, because they were scholars during the Jahiliyah period. So our notion of initial understanding that Jahiliyah means really Jahiliyah is of course debunked. Then those with wealth, through riba, through oppression, through denigrating groups, marginalized societies. Okay. But of course, you move on. Zia contributed and all this. We were involved in society, initially Islamization of knowledge. But I think then we realized that we need to progress to the integration of knowledge. But then we realized actually epistemology and epistemological science is a subject, a discipline that you really need to develop. Because we cannot be stuck to the 70s with Edward Said, and which I think is a tour de force. And as you know, I have mentioned this before, that this Israeli scholar from Tel Aviv University, who said that greater than the Iranian Revolution, having so much impact on the world, is science or capitalism, because he actually debunked that notion of knowledge and understanding, dominated by the West and Western viewpoint. And of course, course, he said it in a very condescending manner and very anti sort of Edo-Science, because Edo-Science said has to try to regain that sort of narrative on rejecting or debunking the traditional norms. But as I said, to return in the 70s, we have to advance. And I think the scholars then come back to re-looking epistemology as a very serious discipline. And I think the IIIT has a series of programs in that manner, because every term, every concept, every policy and vision is not independent by itself. It's not value-free. It is loaded with certain precepts. I think Zia in his introduction made reference to this in this epistemology book. I read this morning, fortunately. He had so many references that I chose to ignore them. But I think the substantive argument is really powerful and strong. So so that's my journey on what epistemology is meant to me.
Thank you very much, Dato. Prof. Osman, I would kind of want to ask where you were coming from and getting into the epistemological crisis that is sort of discussed in the Emerging Epistemologies book in particular.
Just to correct my man, sorry man, the scholar referred to is Maulana, not Ali Siddiqui, Abu Hassan Ali Nadwi. The three characteristics of a Jahiliyyah society. But then the chapter is characteristics of a Jahiliyyah society. Okay, sorry man.
Prof. Osman? Prof. Osman, could...
Three characteristics of a Jahiliyyah society. It's not epistemology, it's technology.
You get, the Prof, why don't I ask you then? It's sort of in the while we're.
Hello.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had difficulty earlier following. I couldn't really make sense what Scott was talking about. Can you repeat the question for me, please, Scott?
Yes, don't worry. So I'm just trying to get talking off on this conversation by asking what was sort of the thinking that was happening in the 70s with some of the revivalist thought that was going on, particularly around the Iranian Revolution, and what was happening in Muslim societies here in Southeast Asia, even in reference to the epistemological crisis and the journey towards epistemological justice. Did you hear me? I don't know if he's speaking. Well, yes.
Hello?
Yeah. Hi, Prof. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Oh, you can hear me now. Okay. Yeah. Hi, Prof. Okay, so just
let's clear the question. I got the written question from you, Scott. But is it the same question now?
Yes. So I was just to take us back to the 1970s, late 1970s, when you're a young student, a young intellectual, having all these conversations.
particularly in the
There is
background.
no audio at all. There's no audio at all now.
Oh, no audio. Can you? Or, yeah, I don't know what the other. Yeah, here, Prof, I'll turn over to Zia real quick. So I
You
have
can
him
hear
speak.
well, but unfortunately,
Can you hear me now? Well, while we kind of try to figure out this technological problem, I'll turn over to Prof. Zia. If you can kind of set the stage for where you were at that point in sort of the late 70s, when all of these things are starting to happen, a lot of new ideas are coming out. What to you is sort of the origin of the epistemological crisis that we've been facing since then?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In the 70s, I think in the early 70s, the biggest thing that happened was the publication of Islamization of knowledge, what Islamization of knowledge, a ground plan, the Ismail Faruqi's kind of conceptual framework of what is knowledge all about and what is the problem. I mean, in the early 70s, throughout my sort of university career, when I was studying physics and information science, the most talked about book was Ismail Faruqi's Islamization of knowledge. And immediately, one aspect of Islamization of knowledge was kind of, we found very attractive, and I think most students that I moved along in FOSS, the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, with which I was associated, most of its members immediately understood it. And that was the point that Western disciplines are epistemologically biased. They have inherent bias towards the other, right? And if you like, a bias in favor of Western societies and culture. That aspect was there in Ismail Faruqi right from the beginning. Edward Said came about a year later and more or less said the same thing, but the two said the same thing in a totally different framework. Ismail Faruqi's was very much, the book was addressed to Muslims. It didn't have any theoretical framework. It was just a kind of outline. Edward Said, a very theoretical book addressed to the West and to the rest, and was based on literary criticism, came from literary theory, so it had a much more powerful impact than, say, Ismail Faruqi's. But the other aspect of Ismail Faruqi that right from the beginning I found problematic, and as I kept thinking more and more about it, it became even more problematic. The notion, the very idea of Islamizing discipline. You see, the disciplines do not come out of the sky. God doesn't say this is physics and this is chemistry, this is sociology, this is anthropology, this is art, this is literature. These are classifications that we have imposed on them. And disciplines very much reflect the culture they emerge from, right? And disciplines also thrive if they have a power of a civilization. You see, for example, the West doesn't have a discipline called the Sharia. No, they don't need it. It doesn't come from their culture or society, right? It comes from our culture and society. So I was never convinced that disciplines can be Islamized. But towards the end of the year, of the decade, the 70s, 78, 79, what was happening was the big conferences were happening, Islamic Economic Conference, Islamic Education Conference. And one of those conferences was called something Development Future Perspective, which I organized in Makkah, where Professor Kamal Hassan came, and Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim attended those conferences. And from those conferences, 3 books came out, but one book was called An Early Crescent, Islam, Knowledge and Islam, something similar, Knowledge and Environment in Future of Islam, something like that, to which Professor Kamal Hassan contributed a chapter, if I recall, where in fact the first major criticism of Islamization of knowledge was published. And it was my paper called Islamization of Knowledge, the State of the Art Report, where I actually argued for the first time that disciplines cannot be Islamized. That is a futile exercise. This is how the debate, and this is how it ended. But of course, there was another kind of epistemological debate going on, and Usman Bakar was leading, and Usman Bakar and his guru, Hussain Nasser, was leading that debate. So I'll pass on to Hussain Nasser. Sorry, slip of the tongue. I'll pass on to Usman Bakar to talk about what they were doing. I mean, this is the other Islamic science debate that was going on.
Prof, you're muted, sorry.
I heard just now what Dr. Zia was talking about. I would like to share my own experience in the last 50 years. I would say, as a student of epistemology, if Scott was asking, where was I in the 1970s? Well, I would say that I was in London in the early 1970s, doing my master's in mathematics, and later halfway doing PhD in mathematics. But before I talk about the London days, because I want to connect myself with both Dr. Zia and Dato Seri Anwar, before coming to London, I was at the Malay College, Kuala Kangsar, with Dato Seri Anwar. So we knew each other since school days. Now, I want to mention the things at Malay College. In a sense, it was the beginning of the train of thought associated with epistemology. So at Malay College, I was recruited by Dato Seri Anwar to be in the student body called Badan Revolusi Agama, the religious revolutionary place. What is being revolutionary about Islam? In a sense, looking back, I mean, yes, there was the first time the question: what Islam is basically? What is Islam? And then we have this question of word revolutionary. All right. Then in the same Malay College, there was one teacher, one speaker who came at the invitation of the Badan Revolusi Agama. He said, his name was Dr. Abdul Ahad. He said, Islam is a scientific religion. Several times he would maintain that Islam is a scientific religion. Of course, that provoked me to think, what's the meaning of Islam being a scientific religion? And then there was a talk by Professor Oppenheim, the last white vice chancellor of the University of Malaya. He came to speak at the famous Harvard Hall in Malay College. I don't remember much about what he said, but it's one thing which sticks to my mind until today. He said, he basically was criticizing the specialist, who a specialist is. He said, we do not want to produce specialists who know more and more about less and less. That sticks to my mind. And of course, I mean, after Malay College, I mean, I have to face that thought, the question of what's the difference between generalization and specialization. And then there was Dato Suhaimi Arifin, who was talking about evolution. So all these were my first exposures to ideas that had great bearing on epistemology. The word epistemology was never mentioned, but now looking back, yes, I mean it is associated with epistemology. Now, these were anticipations of my days in London. I joined London University, first at Woolwich College and Bedford College. First, I studied mathematics. Of course, I was not influenced by Professor Oppenheim, but I took mathematics. Now, in my undergraduate study of mathematics, I took courses on Einstein's theory of relativity, and also the question of quantum physics. That was my first exposure. That's very much what I call today mathematical epistemology. And then at college, I was doing my master's, and I studied Bertrand Russell's logical positivism, and he studied his logical thought. There's a lot of issues of epistemology that came to my mind. But it was at it was at the Bedford College that I decided to change my course to philosophy and religious studies, and there was the formative period of my thought. When I came back to Malaysia in the 1970s, again I want to mention this about the Dato Anwar. He introduced me when I came back. I joined the National University. So one day he introduced me to Professor Syed Muhammad Akil Atas, and it was actually during a meeting of the Association of the Academic Staff of University Kebangsaan. I was surprised that he suggested my name for that to be in that persatuan, to be in that society. I was wondering. I said, what did Brother Anwar tell him about me that he decided to nominate me as one of the members of the executive committee? But anyway, to cut the story short, I mean, that was the beginning of my acquaintance with Professor Atas, and for 8 solid years, I was his companion, intellectual companion, and of course, I learned a lot of epistemological ideas, basically his rational epistemology, which, of course, was a complement to what the influence that I had in London. Basically, it was in London in the early 70s that I was introduced to Islamic philosophy, theology, and Sufism, first by Al-Ghazali, and then by Ziauddin Nasr. Now, that in the 1970s, of course, since I was close to Professor Atas, just also like Dato Sri Anwar, one of the issues related to epistemology was Islamization of knowledge. And of course, when I moved to University of Malaya, it was a very important thing that Professor Mku Aziz, the late Professor Mku Aziz, introduced the course on philosophy of science, where I had to teach also epistemology. So that was basically in the 1970s. And one more thing, it was at Mr. Malaya as a lecturer from the University of Malaya that had to teach science, philosophy of science, in not only Western civilization, but also in Chinese civilization, Indian civilization, apart from the indigenous Malay civilization. That's where my interest in epistemology broadened, and where I began to embark on what I call today comparative epistemology. So thank you. That was basically as far as the 1970s was concerned.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Seri, I want to turn it back to you. So now as we roll through the 70s into the 80s, a lot of things are happening. The Cold War comes to an end. Fukuyama says this is the end of history. Obviously it was not. And then we have the Samuel Huntington thesis about the clashing of civilizations. So all around you, you have all these different ideas. Prof. Osman Bakar, you're talking about looking at different epistemological frameworks, especially here in Malaysia, where you have such a multicultural and multiple worldviews all coming together. So I'm just wondering what changed after you had been playing, or after you had been working with the Islamization of knowledge with IIIT. What was happening as we start getting into the 90s? And now we no longer have a bipolar world between the communists and the capitalists, but now new enemies are surfacing, new issues are arising. So.
Unlike Zia, my friend Zia, who has been extremely critical of the Islamization of knowledge from the beginning, and consistently so, and for some compelling arguments to support his arguments, but I take a different position, because we were in the midst of this such a intrusion, powerful intrusion in the academia, to the extent that to say Salamu Alaikum is odd at that time, and there's no question about studying sociology and anthropology and relating to Islam. I remember I was a tutor at that time in Simulator doing my master's under a professor of anthropology, and of course phrases, characters of prayer, whatever in the indigenous, among the indigenous tribes societies, and you can't actually accept that. I mean, from the Muslim standpoint. So if a Muslim scholar then comes out with an argument saying that this is fundamentally flawed and therefore you need to Islamize the discipline. Now I realize now, of course, but let me qualify. At that time, I thought there's a major contribution, at least for the young, energetic Muslims, youth, and they say, look, it's not just Islam, it's economics, but the Muslims have their own tradition, their own contribution to Islamic economics. Okay. So to me, given that period in the 80s, it has had some impact and contribution. And I think I personally benefited immensely, because how do I study, understand topology or sociology or economics, this huge debate, is by debunking some of the so-called dominant mode of thought in the Western paradigm. Although even at that time, I remember there was a conference in Pakistan. I was very young, and I thought I was being misplaced, because all the chiefs were there, you know? Sheikh Taha and Ismail Farouqi, Khurshid, and name, okay? And Dato Siddiqui. And I said, there's no point at this conference for us to give argument after argument attacking capitalism when you have enough material already questioning that. It's better for us to say and just to present a compelling case in support of what Islamic economics is all about. I mean, just my initial thinking. But later on, of course, and Zia is right here, because we can go on with Islamization knowledge. We realize that we need to transcend that. So with initiative of Jamal Bazanji, myself, we invited Zia. It was a very difficult sort of exercise, because he is not keen to have anything to do with Islamization. I said, no, we just have an open forum and a fair intellectual exchange, and see where we move from here. Of course, his condition is that, are you stuck to the old paradigm? I said, no, we are prepared to rethink, reevaluate, and we need to adjust, we'll adjust. And in that a series of meetings in London, of course, we then realized there is a need to shift a little. That's why we came up with this book on integration of knowledge, which I would strongly recommend, because you can find its historical antecedents of the origins of Islamization of knowledge, how we have to move to face contemporary challenges and integration knowledge is the answer for now. No. Well, that's the position as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's why then you, as Osman said, you show epistemology, which is not an issue at hand at that time. Then we realized that these are core issues that we need to introduce to get our students and academia to be better grasped in this, because this is a major challenge. Okay, just before again, I forget, I'm just too much politics in my head. The Israeli scholar from Tel Aviv that attacked ferociously Edward Said's Orientalism is Martin Kramer, a good scholar in his own right, but extremely anti, although Zia reminded me that he was a student of Edward Said in Columbia University. But when I'm saying that in the realm of ideas, it's better ideas, if you are able to articulate and present it well, this is far more effective than the jihadis of a sort. Understand? No? Because you are really then inculcating the understanding, the habit, which is not in the purview of just Islamic organizations or parties or movements. You know, this issue, and I think that is where I think CPPIT and this sort of dialogue is still important. And mind you, even in Malaysia, when everybody talks about corruption, and suddenly Professor Kamal Hassan came up with this book, and I think his major success is it became again a national narrative. There is substantive discussion of what it means. Other than everybody attacks corruption. The most corrupt in the world will say no corruption. That is our problem now. No, all party, everybody. But if you look and read the book, I've not read the Malay translation, I read only the English text. He gave a strong ethical, moral dimension that must be something absorbed by any individual that understand or have faith. There's no question of faith without, condoning facade, which includes corruption. Small final point, because I was in prison. Of course, I was in prison many times. I can't remember which year, but then one of the books, of course, is prayer, because that's the time you want to try and experience all sorts of sunnah prayers, you know, and making sure that you don't miss anything. So I read this Munyatul Musalli by Sheikh Abdullah Dawud Fatani. And my interest was prayers. Just reading, and you know, no, I'm not suggesting that I'm such a devout Muslim. So, but then at that time I said, why don't I use my time here just to make sure that you strengthen spiritually, enlightening into practice. So you did one of that. But what is, should I say, I'm amazed because the last chapter is Tatmim al-Fa'idah. Penamatnya bermanfaat. I mean, there's an ending which gives you a lot of benefits. And that is the entire chapter is on justice. You know? No, to me, it's quite surprising because you're talking about a traditional scholar, a bit sophistic, and talking about all sorts of prayers. But he gave a compelling argument against corruption, against facade, poor governance, arrogance of power. In that last chapter, is about, I'm talking about the year 1517, 1519, the book. So you see, what the relevance here, what I'm saying is, you actually can derive a lot of advantage from digging to this tradition of ours, contrary to what we learn in school and universities. The whole issue of governance and articulating issues, more complex issues like corruption, called the Critical Muslim on prayer in justice. So, Scott, I'm sorry. My point is the shift when it comes to epistemology, it's also rooted in our tradition. It's not something that is just something new and great and post-normal. No, it has its roots in our tradition, but we articulate it in the context of our modern thinking and expertise.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Prof, I wondered if you could enhance Dato Seri's perspective of this. Dato Seri and Dr. Jamal Berzinji were playing sort of a referee between you and IIIT over this issue of Islamization of knowledge. And I'm just curious what other things are going on in your thinking as to how we need to make this shift that Dato Seri is speaking of?
Not quite true. I think I was totally marginalized, let's be honest. They totally ignored me. Now, I want to say couple of things about Islamization of knowledge. First of all, the 70s, 80s, and most of 90s were totally dominated by Islamization of knowledge. Without the Islamization of project and without IIIT, there would not be the International Islamic University in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, where the people are sitting here, or Islamic University in Islamabad, where even efforts to make Islamic University in Nairobi and so on and so forth. And there would not have been so much literature that we can actually criticize. You've got to have something to criticize. You can't criticize things in vacuum. But sometimes ideas have to run their course before you realize that they're futile. Because initially, you can't say that they're futile, right? And no matter how strong the counter-criticism may be, some ideas have to run their course. Now, it is not totally true that Islamization of knowledge was the only thing around. Another epistemology debate was very intense, and that essentially was mystical debate, if you like. Let's say lots of people were very impressed by Hussain's Islamic cosmological doctrines, that had a lot of epistemological content. Najibullah Tas, with all this stuff going on. Now, there were almost parallel debates. There is no correspondence between, say, Najibullah Tas and Hussain's position and the real Islamization of knowledge position. Although they may use similar terminology, Islamic terminology, it's two different ways of looking at the world. They're not exactly the same. So there were debates in parallel, and the criticism was essentially ignored. And that is the tragedy. That's why I think the Islamization of knowledge project was not as productive. You cannot have any particular idea that spreads like a fire throughout the Muslim world, go unchallenged, go without criticism. And had criticism had been taken into account in the 70s and the 80s, it would have been a totally different project and totally different enterprise, in my opinion. So, never mind, better late than never. When the criticism was when they asked me to rethink the Islamization of knowledge project, the first thought was, no, I don't have anything to do with it. This is what I tell him. I said to him, no. He was holding my hand like this in the meeting and saying, no, you must do it. And I said, no, I was pushing him, right? It was always kind of going on. And Jamal Berzinji was sitting looking amazed. And then he said, when you two have worked it out, we can move forward. So right. Now we are in a totally different position. The world has changed so much that neither the Islamization of knowledge project nor much of what was said in terms of Hussain's and Najibullah Tas debate has any real value, in my opinion, because the world has changed very much, and that's what emerging epistemology is all about. The world has changed in 3 or 4 ways. First, knowledge production itself is not what it used to be. A great deal of knowledge in the future will be produced by artificial intelligence. Right? Now, we human beings are very good at finding patterns. That's how we make progress. looking at patterns, and then patterns then allow us to solve problems. But artificial intelligence can find patterns a million times faster than us. That's really what it's all about. And this is because it can find patterns faster than us. It can, for example, predict, whether you get cancer or not, and spot emerging cancers because it can do this faster. That's the first thing. Second, a great deal of knowledge in the future will be based on big data. It's the data that we handle every day that comes on computers and what have you. And we know that a great deal of data is actually junk. Right? It's fake news, it's fake, deep fake, it's innuendos, it's all sorts of post-truth stuff. Yet, when artificial intelligence or other people shape knowledge, big data plays a very important part. A lot of biases will actually get in there. Third, developments in biotechnology will transform what it means to be human. That will require completely new thinking of what it means to be, what is knowledge all about. And finally, and this is the point that Ismail Farouqi was trying to make, but didn't quite make it properly. Why did he find Western disciplines, sociology, anthropology, economics, political science, international relations, why did he find them problematic? Why did he say they are biased against Muslim societies? Because he saw there was a power that was defining them, that was defining the discipline. The real power of the West, as I've argued so many times in the past, is the power to define. The West defines what is sociology, West defines what is anthropology, what is human rights, what is religion, what is freedom, etc. So but that power to define is being slipping away as real economic and military power moves from the West to the East. Right? So the West will not have that. We can already see that. They will not have that power to define. Therefore, the nature of what is knowledge will itself change, because the definition of what is knowledge will change, or who defines what is knowledge. So these are very profound things that are happening. And because of that, this is why the book is called Emerging Epistemologies. New theories of knowledge will emerge. So we need to rethink what knowledge is. But we have an asset that I think other cultures do not. And that's something that Islamization of Knowledge Project did not emphasize. Our culture, that the culture of Muslim civilization is phenomenally rich, unimaginably rich in epistemological heritage. Right? If you read, for example, Franz Rosenthal's book, Knowledge Triumph, he actually shows there were 500 different definitions of knowledge during the Abbasid period. And the very simple things like Hadith criticism is a form of categorizing knowledge and defining what is knowledge and what is not. Right? And then, of course, the Quranic interpretation and so on and so forth. So we have phenomenal assets. But we cannot use these assets simply because they are buried in history. We have to revive them and contemporize them. We can't just say, just because this thing worked in 8th century, it will work today. But what we need to do is to look at the conceptual structure and then operationalize that conceptual structure in contemporary times. That's what the challenge we have about emerging epistemologies. So when the knowledge production itself changes, and it is changing, we need to approach it from Islamic conceptual perspective, and then decide what is knowledge from our perspective and what is not knowledge, and how do we develop the disciplines that we need in contemporary times. I think I've said enough, maybe.
No, thank you. That's very good. I know we're still having some audio problems with the Zoom feed, but Prof. Osman, can you still hear me? I've sent you a message, so I don't know if... Oh.
I would like to take up the issue of epistemological justice.
Please.
Dato Sri Anwar's afterword is a very wonderful article, and of course I share with him this quest for epistemological justice. It is something also which is dear to my heart, and until we make progress in our path towards epistemological justice, then we still have a lot of things, because as I understand it, the idea of epistemological justice is the very foundation of all other forms of justice. It is the underlying principle of social justice, political justice, economic justice, and indeed civilizational justice, if you may be allowed to use that word. Now, I think let me first of all just briefly bring up also the question of epistemologization of knowledge. In the pursuit of epistemological justice, is it necessary to maintain epistemologization of knowledge as a program, as an enterprise? I would argue yes, but there is a but let's say yes first. Yeah, it's yes. I think the Muslims as an ummah, as a world community, which has its own distinct identity and characteristics, if we still believe in the idea of the Muslim ummah as an identity, as an entity, then I think the pursuit of epistemologization of knowledge is necessary. I've always argued that it is, in other words, one way of looking at epistemologization of knowledge, of course, is as a program for the ummah, for practical reason, in order to internalize those ideas which we associate with epistemologization of knowledge. We need to maintain that, but that is for the ummah. That's why for initially, when we understand that as a program for the ummah, we did not have a problem basically. But sooner or later, and it did happen that when non-Muslims became interested in what we were doing about epistemologization of knowledge, then not just simply question, but also negative responses. And I don't blame that. We have to understand it has to happen, that kind of response has to appear because what we call epistemologization of knowledge has implications for discourses, for the universal discourse of knowledge and so on. Therefore, sometime in the 1980s, for example, an increasing number of Muslim and non-Muslim academics in Malaysia, I think, what is their role for them as non-Muslims? To talk about epistemologization of knowledge, what does it mean for them? I think many of us could not answer that, making them somehow having no place or role in that. And that's why I reflected on that. I see that there is a universal dimension of the issues discussed in epistemologization of knowledge, which we did not do well. In fact, until now, I would say of the epistemologization of knowledge, because we do not address the issues that come under the radar of universal issues. What it means basically is universal issues in epistemology. For example, the question of the epistemology of conquest, the conquest and desire. That issue can be discussed purely in Islamic terms, or we can discuss that issue as a universal issue. And this is where I think we were weak. So I'm saying now that while Muslims may continue to discuss epistemologization of knowledge as an ummatic program, but we also need Muslims to be involved at another level, another discourse on epistemology, which is basically what I think Dr. Ziauddin is trying to do in the in his latest book. So this was so personally I'm trying to do. All right, how can we take the discourse? Before I used to discuss the issue of the conquest of nature, for example, in purely Islamic terms. So when talk about, for example, Islamic technology, I remember Dr. Faruqi, of course, talked a lot also about this concept of tazkir, in other words, the kind of the Islamic version, Islamic response to the Western idea of conquest of the of nature, and I still believe that is still necessary. If Muslims want to maintain that unity between religion and science and technology, they have to do that. But at the same time, right now, we have encountered many different discourses on epistemology, which not really along the line discussed by Dr. Zia, because let's say United States, you have the Buddhist groups led by Dalai Lama, for example. All right, they are also interested in how to deal with the issue of how to use nature in a way that is in conformity with the spiritual perspective. There are the Hindus also. What I'm saying that there are streams of thought dealing with epistemology from the perspective of other religions. And to me, I see this where there should be a dialogue between Muslims and the co-religions of the other religion on how to respond to this issue brought up by Dr. Zia in his latest book, which I agree in terms of statement of the problem, but the question how to respond to this problem from the religious perspective. And I believe that there are commonalities between the different religions. That's why I think Dr. Zia Anwar and also try to have, for example, in the 1990s, the second half of the 1990s, we had in Malaysia called the dialogue. For example, organized a conference on Islam and Confucianism. That was the beginning. In other words, we are looking forward to the future, especially in the context of Malaysia. We have to talk to each other, but not just to talk in just a coffee shop conversation, but a serious one. But today, for example, in Malaysia, I know there are Buddhist intellectuals, Hindu intellectuals, Christian intellectuals, and it is up to Muslims, for example, to have dialogue on issues of epistemology. There is another level of commonality that is beyond the communities in current science, in modern science. So I would say it's an ongoing thing. The pursuit of economic justice is something that is ongoing. I think we believe that we have the treasures, we have the intellectual ideas in our own tradition, but we need to formulate that in the context of the current situation. So, of course, I support very much the thing that was mentioned by Dr. Zia in the book. In other words, we have to get out. We have to navigate our way out of this what we call the epistemology of conquest and desire. There's still a lot of things to be done before we can see the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. I agree. The notion of these civilizational dialogues in post-normal times talk and with the CPPFS, we talk about polylogs. And I'm sorry, Dato Seri, but you live in Malaysia and you don't have a choice. You need to have these polylogs between the Malay and the Chinese and the Indians and all the other communities if we want to overcome the issues. And it's not so much that there's the shift from the west to the east, which is occurring, but it's also this notion that the power to define and these epistemological powers are being given to AI and different technologies, which have biases of their creators. but have all sorts of other interesting biases, and so very complex situations we're facing. But now we'd like to shift the conversation. We want to open it up to you all, so if you all have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and you may ask a question of any of our panelists. I can hand the mic if...
Questions? This Maria should have a question. Maria from Pro.
Okay. Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much for such a brilliant and mind-blowing talk or lecture. Actually, I'm from political science. I would like to write about politics, but I think it's quite sensitive. So, especially for Dr. Anwar, what is your epistemological solution for corruption? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The authority right in front of you, Kamal Hassan, who has taken a lot of time to study. But actually, is again, is understanding, is combating not only ignorance, but it's combating ignorance. Combating the understanding of religion, or Malay culture, or governance, and condoning or tolerating the excesses, which include the facade, which include corruption. Okay, so that's one issue. But I think this is where I think I'm involved in the political party. I think that's where we fail as a party. I mean, generally, because the debate is just contending force to regain power. It lacks a direction, it lacks a firm commitment. So when now, for
to imbibe the values, the integrity of Islam, does not have to wear Islam on the sleeve, in that sense, right? So this was the problem. This is the was and is the problem with Islamization of knowledge. It wants to wear Islam on the T-shirt, right? Where it's not necessary to do that. You can be human and just and Muslim and non-Muslim, but if you are just, then you're just for everybody. You can't just be just for Muslims and unjust for non-Muslims, or other way around, right? So the epistemology that we are seeking, that may be a synthesis of the emerging epistemologies, is universally just, right? Or it should be universally just. It cannot be just, for Muslims, and this bit is for Muslims and that bit is for Muslims. So in a sense, we need to get away from the ghetto. We have turned Islam into a ghetto, and we want to keep ourselves in that ghetto. We need to get out of that ghetto and see Islam in universal terms. Right. There is no such thing as Islamic history, but there is a thing called history of Islam as world history. The world history is Islamic history because Islam was present there. So you do not try and subcategorize Islam into a bigger category continuously. That's what we're trying to do, and that's what we need to avoid. So we need to think of ourselves in much bigger terms, in much more universal terms. That's what I would say.
Yeah, here. Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Professor. I'm Shazani, a PhD candidate in ISTEC, IIUM. I want to relate with you regarding your take on universality of epistemology, especially with regards to its dialogue with the Western epistemology. I think you are familiar with the discourse about the critical history, the critical period, the critical theory, Wittgenstein, Adorno, and so forth, Nietzsche, towards the postmodern period, Derrida and Foucault. There are certain evolutions of knowledge to which we are also, in a way, subservient, and to this day still
boundaries and genuinely produce something that treats all humanity on the basis of equality. It's a pretty profound kind of requirement, as it were, in epistemological terms. But that's what our goal should be.
Hello, Salam, Prof. Zia. I have a question. In social sciences, we have like the sociology of knowledge, and it's rarely talked about counterpart, the sociology of ignorance. So when we talk about knowledge production, I was curious to see what your framework on epistemology says about the production of ignorance. So with social sciences and with intellectuals in the third world, like Shariati, who talk about istimar, domestication, Hussein Alatas, and I'm here, yeah. Yeah, right at the end.
Very good question. In a sense, what's happening, one of the changes in the knowledge production is that ignorance is also increasing by leap and bound. Up to, say, almost by the end of the 20th century, most disciplines did not deal with ignorance. Ignorance was something that did not exist. It was out there. Science was, technology was all about progress. Social sciences were all about understanding human societies, etc., etc. And we're making great progress. There was nothing. But in contemporary times, ignorance has made a big comeback. We are discovering, as I think Osman Bakar quoted somebody, that more we know, the less we know. Right. Sorry, is there a...
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Can I finish? Yeah. That's thanks partly to postmodernism, but also partly to this post-truth nonsense. Think of how much ignorance there is on the internet in terms of fake news, bots, scamming, all sorts of kind of what I call it small of ignorance, very large quantity of ignorance that is produced daily basis on social media, etc., etc. All that is kind of often distributed as knowledge or information, at least information is not knowledge. So that ignorance is really increasing. But there are two other kinds of ignorance that we need to consider. One is the ignorance that has the future built into it. So, for example, COVID-19 was a virus we had not come across before. So we were ignorant of the virus. But at the same time, we had to develop a vaccine of the virus. So we have to fight that ignorance. Unfortunately, due to totally radical way of developing vaccines, we were able to overcome that ignorance. But that ignorance took us almost a year to overcome. So ignorance had an inbuilt future dimension. It was the ignorance that could only be overcome in the future, but we were aware of that ignorance. And there's a third kind of ignorance that is essentially a fundamental part of the way we think. Right? If, for example, you think, and I've come across this example recently, if you as a Sunni think a Shia is kafir, then there is only one solution for it, is that you have to change your thought.
you have to move to your unthought. There's no other way of overcoming this ignorance, because this is a fundamental part of what you believe or what you think. But it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. So the only way you can correct it is to change your own paradigm as well. And so ignorance that requires paradigm shift. Now there are lots of other categories of ignorance, and there are, whole variety of ignorances. So not surprisingly that in the last 10 years, whole discipline has emerged, the discipline of ignorance studies. And the professor who started the discipline has an article in this issue of ignorance, explaining what is ignorance studies. But if you look at this issue, it's full of various exploration of varieties of ignorance. For example, the notion of the jinn in Muslim thought. What kind of ignorance that generates, because it's the unseen. So the different varieties of ignorances that are explored there. But my final point is more and more we'll have to pay attention to ignorance and ignorance studies because as the nature of knowledge production changes, ignorance will become more and more important, and we'll have to pay attention to that. There were 2 or 3 questions in front here.
Thanks. And so, Prof, you're going to have the last question, but before that, it's going to be a 2-part question. We did get one question from the Zoom that I wanted to just throw in there, and you can comment on, along with the Prof's question. So that one is, what is your view on the idea of system philosophy? To what extent can it be an epistemological offer that is different from today's epistemology, which tends to be atomistic and eliminates a holistic view of nature? So,
sorry, you can answer this one. Yeah, you can answer this one.
Well, we'll probably have the question as well.
Okay, I'm Sardar. As academics and probably to the intellectual community, this is interesting. But people could be surprised that a politician and a prime minister candidate like Anwar Ibrahim could come to this kind of session in the middle of political campaigns, a very important one in Malaysia. Now, my point is, I'd like to ask Professor Zia, if there is a place in this in political campaigns, I mean, how to bring intellectual and discourse on knowledge, I mean, philosophy and epistemology and all this, into the political campaign. And has there a place for it? Do you see any of this in the United States or the Western democracies? Is there a place for this in political campaigns? And I would also like to ask a more like long-term impact of this in civilizational studies, Professor Osman Bakar. Is it associated with the sustainability of civilizations where societies have strong foundation in philosophy and epistemology? These are societies that are sustainable, and societies that do not have this strong foundation are not sustainable. Would that persist hold, do you think? Thank you.
Mrs. Bakar start first.
I was actually going to ask, Prof. Osman, if you're, hopefully we're still not having technical difficulties, if you would like to address the Prof's question.
It's not logged off. Okay, so I can't answer. I will leave Professor Osman Bakar to come and answer whenever he can. But the first question. Oh, he's come back.
Yeah, Osman.
Prof. Osman, were you able to hear the question? Is he muted?
Again, I think he's muted.
You repeat the question.
Well, I'd have to have sorry. If you would, yeah.
Osman, could you hear me?
No.
This is Sardar.
He can't hear you clearly.
Could you hear me, Professor?
He has to unmute himself.
Yeah. I was asking whether you would hold a thesis that the sustainability of a civilization would depend on the strength of a strong philosophical or paradigm, a worldview, or theoretical framework that society holds on to, and this includes the rulers and embraced by the society at large, and so another way of reversing that would be that a society which does not have a strong foundation in belief system, epistemology and philosophy would also be a society that would not be sustainable in terms of its civilization.
I think it's we have to move on.
Sorry about that, bro. We'll try to find a way to.
Someone like the question?
So actually, here's a question from the Zoom chat, which is in the chat of Zoom, and I'll read it for you. What is your view on the idea of system philosophy? To what extent can it be an epistemological offer that is different from today, which today's epistemology tends to be atomistic and eliminates a holistic view of nature? So this notion of systems philosophy. Sorry. I think. Sorry, But we continue this conversation well beyond this. The point I make about systems philosophy is it sounds like it's this notion of taking different concepts and trying to integrate them into new philosophical frameworks and ideas. Again, as long as you're critiquing these systems themselves and these concepts that you're taking on. Because again, if they're defined or if they're from a certain worldview, you have to make sure that you account for the ignorances that you're not thinking about, that are beyond your worldview, as Prof had said in that third order of ignorance, which is an ignorance that is unthought to you because it disobeys your fundamental viewpoint.
If I understand the question correctly, well, I'll answer that if we understand the teachings of Islam, all aspects of life, on all issues that are now before us at international level, at global level, I would say that yes, I think it is possible. It is possible to come up with a dialogue between the followers of different faiths, of different religions, including issues of environment, issues of the search for happiness. You just name it. I think it is possible, but we have to prepare ourselves. We need to be concerned to be well versed with what Islam teaches on the subject. To me, finally, it comes to the question of the epistemology. We have epistemology in general. We have also the epistemology associated with the different disciplines. In other words, we want to say to critique of the contemporary, say, sociology, social science, for example, then we have to be to know the epistemology of social science from the perspective of Islam. Now, with regard to the book that Dr. Ziauddin has come up, I think it is, to me, whether in this introduction or in this chapter 1, basically, he wants to deal, he invites us to join in trying to understand the issue of the epistemology of conquest and desire, which needs from which we need to get out basically. Well, it's great to me, and another approach is to offer what is the Islamic critique of that epistemology, taking into account the different epistemological thought that is available within Islamic civilization. In the past, and also to borrow that, to apply that, we got an issue of this epistemology of conquest against nature, as well as conquest against other people. It's not a clear version. I think we understand both. And if we look at the question of epistemology of conquest and epistemology of desire, if we referring to the psychological dimension of the issue, in this understanding of now, basically, we agree that the current, all these decades, the pursuit of conquest of nature is becoming more and more serious, more impactful, because it is absolutely linked to the question of the meaning of that, the second human nature, which is the animal nature, which is based on greed, on that. So the situation is made worse and worse and worse because what the West is doing is to use progressive, this technology, which is getting more and more sophisticated, but that technology is to serve the animal soul, to serve our nature, to serve the reflection, and to lastly, to empower technology so that they can, the greed, the human greed can be manifest in more visible. So it is debate. It's a subject that covers many things. In order to get out of that epistemology, right? So Dr. Ziauddin, of course, said that, all right, I mean, this is how we are now in that transition period, that post-normal, right? In the meantime, we are just watching, observing. What said to me, no, we don't just passive observer. I think if we believe that there is a thing that has a Islamic epistemology of the natural sciences, for example, or technology, for example, then that is a response to that. So I know our problem is what the mentioned as fake knowledge, right? The instances, the varieties of ignorance, all these are chasing us. I mean, the piling up is drawing of these categories of knowledge and ignorance is at the more rapid rate than what we can counter. That's our problem. In other words, the speed of our counter action against these kinds of things against truth, for example, are too rapid for us. I mean, that is the practical problem we are facing. It's not that we don't know what to do. It's not that we have an answer. But how to put that into action when fueled by artificial intelligence, information technology, we are just left behind. I think that's our problem.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Dato. That's a wonderful way, I think, to conclude our conversation today. And I want to thank all of you and all of our asked questions so far. And a very special thanks to Prof. Dato Osman Bakar, Dr. Seri, Anwar, Ibrahim, and Prof. Sardar for...
But one question was left unanswered.
One question was left unanswered.
Politics.
So, sorry, we are out of time though, and so people are asking us to start figuring out. Well, we can keep talking, so we can do it unofficially, but I do want to close this official session. So, thank you all again, and please stay safe this fun season, and keep questioning, keep being critical. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. You can ask.